In this video, we will be covering how strong is the Kiryu Saga Godzilla. Unlike all the other Millennium-era Godzillas, this one was special enough to get a sequel movie, with the first film being Godzilla Against Mechagodzilla, released in 2002, and its follow-up film in 2003, Godzilla Tokyo SOS. This Godzilla in particular pretty much has the same exact height and weight as most of the previous Millennium Godzillas, being at 55 meters tall and weighing 25,000 metric tons. Just like with Godzilla 2000, this Godzilla is a follow-up to the original 1954 Godzilla, with them even showing flashbacks to the original 1954 movie, though it's clearly altered footage, as you can clearly see. However, several other Showa-era movies have been confirmed to have happened in this timeline as well, the most obvious examples being the 1961 Mothra movie and the 1966 War of the Gargantuas movie. According to both the theater program, which is about as official as you can get, as these are given out with people who purchase tickets for the movie, as well as the official tie-in book, these monsters are canon to this specific timeline. I'm not going to name them all because, well, that's a lot of names to list, so I'm just going to flash them on screen. But yeah, a lot of these 50s and 60s Showa-era monster movies happened in this particular timeline. Though it doesn't really do much to give us an idea of the power scaling, seeing as how they literally state after this that Godzilla's the strongest of all. And yeah, Godzilla should already scale to being the same strength as his 1954 counterpart. The beginning of the movie starts in 1999 with the military trying to attack Godzilla with their maser weapons. Masers first debuting in the War of the Gargantua movies and have been a prominent feature in several of the Godzilla movies throughout the decades. After their initial attack fails, they state that Godzilla is immune to masers. And I want to point out that masers are basically lasers, so they of course have speed of light attack speed. They're also apparently less effective when wet, as they were reduced to 70% of their power output while in the rain. After showing off a trilobite android, this one scientist guy gets the idea to basically do the same thing using the bones of the original 1954 Godzilla. Wait a second, wasn't the original 1954 Godzilla skeleton reduced to nothingness, as you can clearly see here at the end of the 54 film? Well, not in this timeline, the bones still remain. And long story short, they basically decide, hey, it would be a great idea to just build a giant robot body around the skeleton of the original Godzilla. Hence the start of Mechagodzilla project, which would later come to be known as Kiryu. Kiryu was completed in the year 2003, possessing all kinds of crazy toys like a maser cannon, rocket launchers, homing missiles, a beam cannon, an electric sword, and the strongest weapon, the Absolute Zero Cannon, a weapon powerful enough to smash atoms. I'll have more to say about this weapon in particular later. The humans finally get a chance to test Kiryu's power against Godzilla, and Kiryu seems to be doing quite fine, driving him back with his double maser cannon, which is roughly about 2.4 times as powerful as a regular maser cannon. That's the attack that Kiryu fires out of his mouth. However, when Godzilla roars, it triggers the memories of the original Godzilla, and the humans find out the hard way that it might not have been a good idea using the bones of the original Godzilla, as he basically takes over, a literal ghost in the machine if you will, and goes on a rampage for like another hour before running out of power. I should also mention that Kiryu only has enough energy to operate for 2 hours, but the Absolute Zero Cannon, just firing it once, takes up 40% of that power, and apparently flying or using its weapons will deplete it faster, as obviously Kiryu did not blast away at Godzilla for a full hour straight before going berserk. The humans fixed the little glitch that caused more damage than Godzilla himself did, and round 2 begins between the two monsters soon enough, and this time we get a proper fight between the two. Kiryu lands way more hits on Godzilla than Godzilla does on him, and I want to point out this little clever strategy Godzilla does where he starts targeting Kiryu's various weapon systems, taking out his little shoulder cannon back gear, as well as the weapons mounted on his arm. Godzilla seems to tank pretty much all of Kiryu's attacks except for the double maser cannon, which seems most effective when fired directly at Godzilla's head, as well as the shock attack that Kiryu does as well. At just 45% power, Kiryu picks up Godzilla, flies out towards the ocean, and fires his Absolute Zero Cannon point-blank range underwater, forming a massive ice pillar. Godzilla comes out of it, but he's got a massive wound on his chest, and Kiryu's run out of power, not to mention taking heavy damage to the Absolute Zero Cannon on his chest, as well as losing an arm, so he's in no condition to continue the fight either. This results in a tie, something we don't often see in Godzilla Godzilla. And yeah, a post-credit scene with the pilot of Kiryu confirmed herself that the fight ended in a tie. Now before we go on to cover the second movie, we can already do quite a bit of power scaling just from this first movie alone. So that brings us back to the Absolute Zero Cannon. So there are 3 different ways to look at how strong the Absolute Zero Cannon is. The first wiki have their own calculations for the Absolute Zero Cannon based off the 3 buildings it was able to atomize in the movie when Kiryu first tried to hit Godzilla with it. The Versus wiki calculated this to be about 109 petaton, which is multi-continent level. However, I've seen a second calculation somehow, because I can't find where the source for the math is, somehow get it to 1.5 to 71 exatons, which is in the high multi-continent to moon level range. And then there's the idea of absolute zero itself. According to the third law of thermodynamics, basically the energy that would be needed to reach absolute zero would basically be infinite. Like, it's apparently easier to get to sub-zero energy over getting to, well, absolute zero energy. The amount of energy would be literally infinite, as in, like, universal level. Now tell me if this makes sense. Firing the Absolute Zero Cannon takes up 40% of Kiryu's power, but Kiryu would need infinite power in order to be able to fire such a weapon in the first place. So obviously that's not real. I'm thinking whoever wrote the plot for this movie probably didn't do this much research into the science with it. There's also a page on the Versus Wiki discussing this very topic about fictional uses of Absolute Zero, and how obviously they wouldn't scale up to universal level. So I'm guessing the way it was measured was through a different method, I guess, for how much energy it would take to atomize these 3 buildings here. On top of that, there's the energy for the oxygen destroyer. I can't remember if I covered this in a previous video. Maybe I did with the first Godzilla Addendum video or the GMK video. I can't really remember. But the oxygen destroyer is literally a weapon that bypasses conventional durability, so it's kind of difficult to give it a definitive attack potency. People will say it's like, oh, the original Godzilla is like multi-continent level because he was able to resist the effects of the oxygen destroyer for 2 minutes. Well, guess who also resisted it for half of those 2 minutes? Dr. Serizawa himself, the guy who's literally holding the oxygen destroyer as it activates. So clearly, it's not working instantaneously. Just the idea that the skeleton of the original survives a weapon that should bypass conventional durability. We're getting to, like, just straight up hacks durability here, people. Or, as most people will just call it, plot armor. Because obviously, you know, this movie's story wouldn't exist without the bones of the original Godzilla present. Some variations of the maser weapons throughout the older Godzilla movies have basically functioned as, like, freeze weaponry. And as I pointed out near the beginning of the video, the maser weapons apparently are weakened in the range. So if the Absolute Zero Cannon's basically just like a super amped maser cannon, then do you think it would have been weakened being fired underwater in an ocean completely submerged? Wikizilla seems to think so, and that's why it didn't just outright kill Godzilla, go all the way through his body. I mean, I don't know how ice and water work, but say it was weakened underwater. How weak do you think the Absolute Zero would be underwater? 50%? 10%? I seriously doubt it would have been reduced to 1%. Even if we lowballed it to, say, 10%, that's still almost 11 petatons. That's still multi-continent level. So there you go, Godzilla's multi-continent level. And yeah, I'm pretty sure if it had hit him when he was out of the water, it probably would have killed him, or at least go all the way through. We don't really know how well this Godzilla does with a giant hole through his chest. This Godzilla's atomic breath was also calculated to move at Mach 1.74, which would put in the supersonic range. Kiryu himself having to move significantly faster than that, as he's able to literally dodge it while also leaving after images. Kind of reminds me of Mechagodzilla, to be honest with you. Since Kiryu also possesses maser weapons, he technically reaches faster than light, or I should say speed of light, attack speed, with said masers. Not that it really does him much good, since it doesn't seem to be as nearly as effective as the Absolute Zero Cannon. I will say hand to hand though, Kiryu seems to be at least decently stronger than Godzilla. The two do go back and forth, but I do think Kiryu lands way more hits on Godzilla than Godzilla does. Not to mention, just look at him just throwing him around and shoving him and everything. So moving on to the second movie, Tokyo SOS, we start things off in February of 2004 with two fighter jets trekking what is soon revealed to be Mothra. And not just any Mothra, the original 1961 Showa-era Mothra. They literally rub it in our faces throughout the entire first act of the movie. Hey, the 1961 Mothra movie's canon to this timeline. And it's here in the beginning we can actually get an idea of how fast Mothra is. The fighter jet reports that Mothra's slowing down to Mach 2, which means that her flight speed has to be significantly higher than Mach 2. However, since this is supposed to be the Showa Mothra, we actually already have a statement for how fast her max speed is. Thanks to this one guidebook specifically covering the Showa Mothra, we know that Mothra's max speed is actually Mach 3, which would put her in the Supersonic Plus range. So basically Mothra and her guardian fairies are basically saying, hey, if you don't return the original Godzilla's bones to the ocean, Mothra's gonna declare war on humanity. Some sort of messing the natural order of things up and whatnot. But the second Godzilla is still out there, and Kiryu is in desperate need of repairs, taking about 37% damage during the battle, losing an arm and also the Absolute Zero cannon. According to guidebook statements, both Godzilla and Kiryu got stronger in the time between the previous movie and this one. Godzilla makes his presence and eventual return known when a Mobius corpse from the Space Amoeba movie pops up on the beach. Originally, this was just going to be some random new dinosaur before Toho decided they should just use one of their existing monsters, and it almost ended up being Anguirus and even Gamera. But they went for the turtle that nobody cares about. Face it, you only remember Space Amoeba because of this little guy. Squid Supremacy. Kiryu is repaired with an assortment of new weapons, and his Absolute Zero cannon is replaced with a Hyper Maser cannon. While not as effective as the Absolute Zero, it is sufficient enough to at least power Kiryu again. Although they do state that if Kiryu gets hit in a bad spot, he might go offline, so that's not good. When Godzilla does make his move, we see that he's still got the scar on his chest from the Absolute Zero cannon a year prior. After two of the human characters basically recreate Mothra's symbol, Mothra shows up to fight Godzilla. And I guess the fight goes on for a few hours because it's daytime when it starts and it's, pitch dark at night when it's still going on. Unlike the Mothra and GMK, who didn't do so well trying to sneak up on behind Godzilla, this one does succeed and manages to drag him forward a bit. She also has a special, scale ability, which basically reflects Godzilla's atomic breath back at him, kind of like the Heisei Mothra did, though apparently using this attack weakens her and slowly loses her ability to fly, despite her doing it for quite a while and still being able to fly fine afterwards. She's even fast enough to dodge Godzilla's atomic breath, which, yeah, Mach 1.74 versus Mach 3, that checks out. However, Mothra's not really doing any damage to Godzilla, just kind of scratching at his head or whatever. Godzilla does manage to grab her leg with his mouth and tear it off. Kiryu does finally show up and engages in combat with Godzilla. Also, I want to point out to some people who want to argue that Godzilla's atomic breath moves at light speed because it's pure radiation. Take a look at this clip here. You see that? The human piloting and controlling Godzilla had time to react, hit this little switch to get Kiryu to dodge. You mean to tell me all that happened at the speed of light? Yeah, no, that human's not reacting to that switch flicking at the speed of light. Meanwhile, while this is going on, the two baby Mothras hatch from one single egg and make their way to the fight. Something that's not entirely well known, however, is that one of these Mothra is actually male. Apparently it's one with the darker complexion and more refined tusks or something like that. I can't tell the difference, but that's what the Wikizilla says. The only other male Mothra we've gotten in the franchise is the one from the Rebirth of Mothra movies, which will be covered someday on the channel. Kiryu takes a bad hit to the head, which knocks him out of commission for a while, forcing the human character to come in to get him back online. In total, the Mothra adult takes 2 hits to the wings, and then 1 direct hit to the body before being vaporized by a Godzilla's atomic breath in a very brutal fashion, I might add. At least with GMK it was quick, but this one, you can see her body being lit ablaze. We also know that 1 atomic breath isn't strong enough to vaporize the baby Mothras, who are able to survive at least 1 attack from it. Also, wow, talk about a crappy birth. You hatch out of an egg, and the first thing you gotta do is swim across the ocean to fight a giant laser that wants to kill you. When Kiryu does finally get back online, he continues to flex on Godzilla with all his assorted moves and weapons and techniques and whatnot, before using the drill to pierce the heavens, Godzilla's wound, weakening him enough to be taken down by the 2 Mothra larva's webbing. However, Kiryu does not want to be responsible for killing the only other member of his kind that he's aware of, so he takes control over his own body and takes Godzilla to the depths of the ocean, ending their battle for the foreseeable future. A post-credit scene reveals that the humans actually have Godzilla's DNA, along with Mobius and several other monsters that I'm going to list here according to guidebooks. According to the Super Complete Works book that ties into this specific movie, apparently their plan was to basically do what they did with Kiryu, but for a bunch of other monsters. And now I'm just wondering, where the heck is my Mechagodzilla? I want my giant robo squid! So how strong is the Kiryu Saga Godzilla? Well, he should theoretically scale to being at least as strong as the original 1954 Godzilla, who, as I've explained in numerous videos, is up to island level. Just like with GMK Godzilla, he should theoretically be at least a little bit stronger than the 54 Godzilla due to being taller and a bit decently heavier, so I'd say about a 10 to 25% power difference. Of course, that would be if it weren't for the fact that he was able to survive a hit from the Absolute Zero cannon, which, as established before, has to be at least multi-continental in terms of attack potency. Even if it was nerfed being fired underwater, even 10% of that power is still multi-continental. That being said, it's pretty embarrassing that a full year later that scarf is still not healed. If it weren't for the fact that he was just being carried by his just raw power and durability superiority, I'd say Godzilla 2000 would mop the floor with Kiryu Godzilla, just because he has so much better regen by comparison. As for his speed, I'd say transonic to supersonic is probably a good range, with transonic being at least his physical speed, and supersonic being the speed, of course, of his atomic breath artery. With both Kiryu and Mothra scaling above said speed, both of them moving fast enough to dodge the atomic breath while also leaving after images, or moving like a blur. So basically what happens when a supersonic tries to fight two supersonic pluses. And that would also probably explain why Mothra was able to fight against Godzilla for quite some time. Not that she did much good with that time. One thing I do want to give this Godzilla credit for, a lot of people in the Godzilla community seem convinced that he's kind of a moron when it comes to fighting. However, I think his intelligence is being underestimated. In his first proper fight against Kiryu in the first movie, we see him systematically destroy the various weapon systems that Kiryu was armed with. That's not something just an animalistic intelligence fighter would be able to do. Also, maybe his first two atomic breath attacks striking Mothra in the wings wasn't by accident, but maybe he was intentionally trying to take Mothra out of the air so she'd be an easier target. If so, then props for Godzilla for exploiting the vulnerabilities of his fighters. I've also seen some arguments on the Versus Wiki that he should be average intelligence because he's the same species as the 54 Godzilla. That's basically saying Peter Griffin should be as smart as Albert Einstein because they're both of the same species. But the Versus Wiki also argue that he could be average intelligence while calm, but when he takes damage he goes into a berserk state, which drops his intelligence down to animalistic. I never got the impression that he was like in an enraged state at any point during the fight. I mean, at the very least, he didn't seem any more angrier than usual. It's also proposed in the second movie the only reason why Godzilla's attacking the humans in the first place is because he's following the bones of the original Godzilla. And sure enough, shortly after his first attack in the very first movie, we see that the humans already have the original Godzilla skeleton in possession. So maybe the events of both movies wouldn't have happened at all if they never took Godzilla's bones in the first place. I'm just saying that maybe this Godzilla is smarter than what most people give him credit for. But in conclusion, he really only gets up to multi-continental because he was able to survive a hit from the Absolute Zero cannon. And I'm pretty sure any attacks of similar degree would annihilate him very quickly. We also don't know how much stronger the Absolute Zero cannon is versus Kiryu's other weapons. We only know that the Absolute Zero cannon was the only weapon able to really inflict lasting damage on Godzilla. So I hesitate to say that both Godzilla and Kiryu scale the multi-continent level when Kiryu really only gets up that high with the Absolute Zero cannon. But it should stand that Godzilla was still able to survive such an attack, but I don't think his own attack potency reaches that level. Wouldn't be the first time, nor the last, when Godzilla's durability far outweighed his attack potency, just something to keep in mind. He's fairly average, all things considered, average being enough to wipe out the entire surface of the Earth, theoretically speaking, or at least that's how much damage it would take to take him out. Join me next time as we cover the final movie in the Millennium era, the 50th anniversary of Godzilla, and my all-time favorite movie of the franchise, Godzilla Final Wars. See you next time, folks. Take care.